I'm Jeanette Proof. This is Joanna Roberts and Imelda Radcliffe, and our presentation is on the plumeria. It was named after a French botanist named Charles Plumer, and it is a native of South and Central America. It also was introduced in 1860 to Hawaii by a German botanist, Wilhelm Hillebrand, and it is now the most common flower in Hawaii. And I'm trying to think, it's a warm weather plant. It does really well here, and also is moderately easy to grow and take care of. So, Imelda.
Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, we have Ricky's working with PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to talk about seed propagation, cutting propagation, soil mixture, fertilizer, and the growing conditions. So we're going to talk about seed propagation first. So here's some seed pods on the actual plant. And sometimes they don't turn dark, depending on the species. But the normal ones I've seen do turn the dark brown. And we're going to be passing out some samples of what not to do. So I cut these last November. A friend of mine, her plants get flowers all the time. So I thought, well, I'm going to cut them and experiment, see if they'll ripen. No, they rotted. So make sure you leave them on the tree. And once they, it takes about 10 months to a year to ripen. So as they get dark and you can tell that they're starting to get older, wrap a nylon around the seed pod. This helps collect the seeds if you want to collect them. Air circulation, the heat still goes through the nylon, so you don't have any obstacles damaging the seed pod at all. You want to, I collect them, and I enjoy watching them grow and experimenting with them. So here's the seed pod once it starts to open, and they look like little pollywogs to me, if you know what a pollywog looks like. So what you want to make sure of is the bottom part is really firm. The firm they are, the better the seed, the better quality your plant you're going to have. And so I have a little tiny plant here. This is from a seed from 2017. Slow grow, right? Wow. And then the 3 plants, the tall one and the 2 in front, are all from the same seed pod. Go figure. So they're from 2014. And the smaller one I did experiment. I left it in a small pot and I used soil perlite and some other stuff. Obviously it wasn't as happy. The other one I used my regular mix and it's nice and big. So when you do collect the seeds, keep them in a dry environment, but I recommend you plant them as soon as you can. You read articles that says you can keep them for months and years. I've done that and they don't do anything. So I advise if you want them, plant them right away. So here's the papery end. You keep that out of the soil when you plant it. You plant it to the soil line, and like I said, you want to make sure it's nice and plump, the little tip there. So here's what it will look like when you have it in the pot. And you want to keep your soil moist. So what I do is I put my pot inside of a glass dish, or I recycle, so like where your meat comes in. And I keep that wet so that it will draw your roots down. And instead of watering from the top, I just keep that wet. And then once they start sprouting, then I back off on the water. Because plumeriums, believe it or not, rot very quickly. And you'll have a start like this, looking all nice, and you'll go out the next day and it's already, you can see the rot line right at the water soil line, it's done. So you can't revive them. So now we're going to talk about propagating. So when you're cutting them off the main plant, you want to make sure you cut them at a real direct angle. And the reason for this is the main plant that you're cutting it from here. If you cut it straight across and you get rain or water in it, that branch will rot. So the angle helps the water to run off. And as it dries, it will harden inside and look like wood and a little hollow nipple inside. So you want to do your best to cut it at an angle. Some people put glue on the tip to help it stay from getting wet inside also. And so on the plant, you'll see the little nodules. That's where leaves were. Well, when you cut your plant, usually the top nodules is where you'll get new sprouts from cutting it. So if you want to keep your plant short instead of getting really big and you can't see the flowers, you just cut it and then they'll branch out and stay low so you can enjoy the flowers a little bit more. When you take a cutting, you want to make sure it's at least 12 inches to 18 inches because you're going to bury it in the soil pretty good. So these are really good samples. And then the cutting will take 60 to 90 days to root. Again, you got to be patient with these because they're not a quick root. And you don't want to overwater them. So what you want to do is you have your soil, you put it in, you'll water it really well till it completely drains out the water and let it be. Touch it, lift up your pot, whatever the techniques you are to find out if your pot's dry or not. Let it completely dry out before you water it again. Because that's another thing, number one problem is rotting. And your cutting will look all nice on top, and you think, oh, this is looking good. And then you go to touch it, and it falls over. It's all rotten on the bottom there, so just not much water. I don't know why people don't consider it drought tolerant, because to me they are. They don't take much water, not much care, so I'd like to see these in some of those yards that have drought tolerant things. So here's what they would look like. Start small. You don't want to go much bigger than a 1 gallon pot when you're planting them because one, you're going to waste soil if it dies, and two, they like tight roots as well. I have one here if you want to look at later. You can actually see the roots coming out of the bottom, little tiny white spaghetti looking roots. Let's see. When you plant them, make sure you label it and the color of the flower and make sure you date it. So you can kind of keep a progress as to how fast it's growing. I find that they grow anywhere from 8 inches to a foot every year. So for me to enjoy flowers off my trees, I have to cut them at least every other year, otherwise I can't see them. And not that I'm short or anything, but so when people come over, oh, you got flower, I say, yeah, you want to cut it? Because I got a branch that's really high, and I'm like, I need to get it down, and I don't want to propagate. I'm already got 70 plants in my yard, so I have to share. So my husband was happy when I loaded the car up with these. He goes, why don't you take more? Okay, now we're going to talk about some soil mixture. I know we're not supposed to give brand names, but I've experimented for many years on this stuff, and I have found that cactus palm soil in an orange bag works the best, mixed with paver sand. And so you mix the two before you put it in your pot. And so the soil I have found are using the sand helps to make the roots warm because they absorb the heat from the sand in the pot, so it's kind of like evenly distributed. And it also helps with drainage. And it also helps weight down your plant because once you get leaves, it gets top heavy. So if I had this outside and we had a little Santa Ana wind, if I didn't have a little weight on it, it's going to topple over. And then you get where they break or your leaves fall off, or it's just a mess. So you want to try and weight it down, and that's the way I've found to help weight them down is to add some soil or sand to your soil. And I think that's it. And Joanne's going to talk about fertilizer.
Good evening, I'm Joanne, and I'm going to talk a little bit about fertilizer and a few of the reference points that we have that we brought for you. Again, we have a picture of a fertilizer to use that you can use. And just remember, when you fertilize, you put phosphate is a magic word. And that number in the middle is a number you want to focus on. And here is a little chart that I found that I thought was really helpful They're gonna pass these around and make copies for everyone. It's the annual Primera calendar, and it talks about everything for the Primera from December to November. You can post this up. I wish I had this when I got my first one, and actually I wish we had been doing this project. I really paid like $25 for the first Primera plant I had, and I wasn't successful with it. So at least now I know what I can do to, be successful. And if I fail, then I don't feel so bad. I spent a lot of money, but I didn't have the right soil mix, and I overwatered it, so it killed over. But this is really great. This little calendar talks a lot about the different types of fertilizer you use. It has a little key code at the bottom, and how you can mix which months are dormant. I thought this would be very helpful to have. I know it would be really helpful for me. So I wanted to share that with you also. Growing conditions, real simple. In the wintertime, protect your plants. And like I said with mine, I didn't know at the time, so I didn't do these things. I didn't protect it by moving it. And living in Beaumont, we have all different kind of weather in Beaumont. So, but protect it, reduce the watering. As Melba was telling you before, it doesn't need much watering. I probably drowned mine before it died when I tried the first one. In the springtime, you want to leave it, spring through autumn, you want to leave it in a warm, sunny location, not too hot, or your leaves will burn. And then the last sheet we have is a reference sheet that I pulled out in this. Actually, there's even a Primera Society that I found out on the internet that there's a lot about these plants. But these are some online places that you can go and visit, and it talks all about the Primera, how to do everything, anywhere from moving it to indoors, from I call it from birth to death. But I went through all of these, and they were very informative. And so I have those on a sheet too that they're passing out, and you can have. I would go and visit some of these websites. They were really, really informative for me, and I'll know now the next time around with the Primera that I hope to get from Imelda that she'll share, and I'll do a lot better with the second round. Thank you.
So I'm doing a section that's just specifically about California native plants first, and then we're going to go into more general all fiber and dye plants. So presentation. Okay, so this is plants for dyes. The first one with the red berries, it's toyon, and it grows into a tree. The second one is elderberry, and both of these plants, the berries, although one's blue and the other one's red, they both make a deep pink color. So this is elderberry, also known as blue elderberry or Mexican elderberry. And then here's the toyon with the red berries. This plant is California sagebrush. It's an artemisia. And so the leaves, flowers, and stems are all used to make yellow dye. Next is our California grape, the most vigorous native vine, and it makes yellow dye that's made from the leaves of the plant. This is a lesser known plant. It's called Emery's indigo, and just by touching the flowers of the plant, it will leave a saffron residue on your hands. Okay, now this is onto the fiber plants. The first one is yucca, and so archaeological evidence has shown that yucca has been used for at least 5,000 years. This is a close-up on individual flower. The next picture is the whole flower stalk, and then over here is the root. The root is also eaten. So here are the different names of yucca, and then you can see down some cordage that was braided. It's made from the leaves of the plant. Our next plant is the native milkweed, And so this is a cordage plant. The stem is the part that's used. This plant is called dogbane, and it's often mistaken with this last plant, the milkweed, but the flowers are how you can tell them apart. Then here are some more pictures of the dogbane. This is the California redbud, and this is used for making baskets as well as for cordage. And then this concludes the part about California native plants.
Okay, so me and Edward are going to start with Fiber Arts Garden. So first off, raise your hand if you know a quilter, someone who sews, someone who weaves or knits. So all of you have someone in your life that would be interested in fiber arts. And so what are fiber arts? Weaving, tapestry, cloth, basketry, like I said, spinning, crochet, knitting, embroidery, tatting, even rug hooking. So why would you grow a fiber arts garden? Like I said, we all know someone who in some way, maybe they're a quilter, they sew clothes, knitters, but also how many of us like a pretty garden with flowers? Most of your flowers that you grow are full of dye. It's where they get their colors from. Bees and pollinators, so when you plant a fiber arts garden, you're going to bring in a lot of bees and pollinators. You'll also grow a very interesting, colorful, and fragrant garden because a lot of herbs, like I said, flowers and things like that are things that have dyes. And then you're probably already just growing a fiber arts garden. You just don't know, so we're going to enlighten you on that. Also, if you're kind of quirky like me and you want to take something from the very raw state into something usable. So imagine if you were to actually get cotton seeds, grow cotton, spin the cotton, dye the cotton, and then knit or weave that into something usable. Historical reenactments. So if you're a history buff, a lot of what we're talking about, as Morgan spoke about, is something historically that you know, the Native Americans and just the folks have been doing for hundreds of years. And then finally, I know I'm a little quirky, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. So Edward's going to go into fiber plants, and then I'll come back and talk to you about dyeing.
Good evening. You might be asking yourself, why fiber? What's the big deal about this cellulose material that's found in plants? It's many things. It's utilitarian, it's beautiful, durable, sustainable, and unique in its texture. But it's made in everyday products that run the gamut, from paper to cord to baskets, mats, textiles. And they're come in all kinds of natural hues. They're durable, much like linen cloth might be. So it really runs the gamut of, you know, some of the advantages of growing or using fiber found in plants. We'll be focusing really briefly on these particular plants here, but there are a multitude of others from broadleaf cattail to paper birch, Indian head, and so on and so forth. As Morgan mentioned, yucca. They're all wonderful examples of fiber plants that can be grown. Cotton, as you can see here, is a tropical annual shrub. It can grow up to 6.5 feet tall, does well in full sun and with regular watering. Enjoys long hot summers, and it takes about 60 days or so for the bulbs to develop. They can be started and planted in a container. 12-inch pots are ideal for those. It can be, it takes, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks. No, I'm sorry, they should be sown 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost date, and they transplant best after the temperature rises to at least 65 degrees, and they are sensitive to frost. It's 45 days to flower, and after the flower dies, and you'll get the boll or the pod forms, and giving us that wonderful cotton. Flax, also another wonderful fiber plant. Also an annual. It does well in rich, fertile soil that's well drained. It should be started sometime in the fall. And it's ready to harvest about 100 days or 1 month after the post-bloom. It does require a heavy amount of processing to get the final linen fabric, but as you can see there, it's wonderful to see the process from flaxseed to linen. Does require full sun and fertile, well-drained soil. And then onward to palms, and these are mostly commercially available, but they can be used to produce some wonderful cordage, seagrass raffia, and wonderful fibrous leaves that are used in artisan crafts. And the agave also commercially available. It gives us these wonderful fibrous leaves that basically vary in their fineness. There are 2 types of fiber in each leaf, the strong fibers close to the surface and the weaker ribbons in the interior. Once again, this requires heavy processing. Milkweed, as Morgan mentioned, is a perennial wildflower. It's common, and swamp varieties are best for fiber. And it gives us 2 fibers, a silky floss from the pods, and also the light waterproof buoyant stalks. They're best cultivated in full sun and warm weather. If you do start them indoors, you can plant them in the fall in the 2 to 4 inch peat pots, and then transplant them once they're about 3 inches tall. These do require minimal processing. And finally, nettles. All nettles are sources of fiber. They're a fast-growing herbaceous plant. They do require rich soil. They need to be well watered. And they do well when planted near other herbs. Once again, full sun here, and of course, 80 days to harvest. Please use care and caution when processing these, because they're stinging nature. And now,
I'm back. So I brought in some samples of dye plants, or fiber that I've dyed. I didn't dye all of it from my garden because it takes a while for things to get growing and to be able to harvest. So you can buy it at different spice and herb shops and things like that. But dye plants for the fiber artist, as you can see, this is not exhaustive, but these are just some of the plants that will give you dye. And these are plants that we typically grow. I tried to pick things that you all would be familiar with, that you would already have growing. Say, for instance, onion skins. If you have a avocado tree, avocado skin and the pits yield a very nice pink color. Goldenrod, I mean, it just, sticky monkey flower, I didn't know that, learned that. Eucalyptus, the bark and the leaves, and we'll kind of get into some of these. Also cherry plum, peach, apple bark. So when we did that wonderful pruning exercise not too long ago, Edward thought I was crazy when I was carrying home big branches, well, it's for the dye pot. So as you can see here, this is a rainbow. You can naturally dye a rainbow from plants that you can grow. And let's see, did you get a picture? Yes. Okay. So there is a bit of a process. I won't go through all of it, but there is a bit of a process to preparing the fiber to dye, especially if it's wool. I kind of strong-armed Edward into letting me buy a fleece straight from a shepherd locally here, very dirty, cleaned it, learned a lot about wool. And that's what I've been dyeing there. So basically the process is you want to start with clean fiber, and then you want to mordant it. And a mordant basically helps the dye particles to stick and attach chemically or molecularly inside of the fiber. It does alter some colors sometimes, and some plants need it and some plants don't. So we've heard of like tannin in tea, in oak, things like that. They don't necessarily need the mordant, but if you want richer, brighter colors, you can add the mordant. So you would prepare your dye materials. I have some samples here. Let's say you have a plant in your garden and you say, I wonder if this is going to yield some dye. Cut it up. Put it in a mason jar, fill it with water, let it sit in the sun, and if the water changes colors, then you pretty much have dye there. These have been sitting out in the sun for maybe about 2 weeks or so. One is, that's rosemary, and then the other one is sorrel, the raspberry rumix, if you've seen the one with the red spine leaves. And so you would prepare your dye bath by simmering. Some of the materials need to be simmered. Some of the barks you just place in water and just let them soak. Some things need to be fermented. So if you grow cactus fruit, those need to be fermented. And then once you have your dye bath, you place your prepared fiber inside of it. You can simmer it for a little bit, or you can just let it sit and forget about it, which is kind of what I did a few times. Then rinse it, dry it, and you're ready to go. You can also modify colors, which I do have some examples I'll show you. You wouldn't know which ones, but but vinegar, for example, just regular white vinegar. You can add vinegar, and that makes it more acidic. You can make it more alkaline and actually shift the colors. So rhubarb bark, it makes a very bright gold color, but you can shift it and turn it into a coral color by adding an alkaline base. So it's pretty exciting. Actually, if you can hand me those little pieces. Nope, that right here. So this is the gold is basically the natural color of rhubarb bark, and then once you put it in an alkaline solution, it actually turns it to a coral or red color. And this is with a lighter dye bath and shifting a color, so you can get various amounts of colors just from one pot of dye. Blue is a very hard color for nature to produce in a dye, so we can get it from true indigo, Japanese indigo, and wood. Indigo and Japanese indigo we actually can grow here. You use the leaves, I think it's the second year. I haven't got that started yet, but that's next on my list. Yellows, as you can see, there are a ton of plants that produce yellow. It's probably one of the most abundant color that you'll find in nature. So generally, if you want to know, I wonder what color is this going to produce, assume it's going to be yellow, and then move out from there. Orange is another color, and you'll see there's some overlap. Some plants will kind of give you a range, and it depends on what was going on with the soil. It depends on your water, if you have hard water, if If your fiber was mordant, a lot of things can kind of shift and play with the colors, but that's kind of the alchemy and the fun of it. You never know what you're going to get. Pinks and reds. So I don't know if any of you remember when we were at the Grow Lab and you saw me going around to the nopales, the cactus plants, and I was picking up those bugs. Those are cochineal, and that pink color in Edward's left hand, that's what they produce. They produce really, really vibrant, rich colors, and that's actually a very diluted color. Some plants like safflower will actually give you yellow, and then you can change that dye bath and shift it and get a pink color afterwards just from the same pot of dye. Purples, if you see Hopi sunflower, Hopi corn, that very rich purple, you can get some good purples there. Hollyhocks, the really dark, rich, vibrant hollyhocks will actually give you purple. They will also give you a green. Who knows that you can get purple and green from the same plant. And some barks, elderberries, as Morgan mentioned. And then you can also get it by over dyeing. So let's say you dye something a cochineal color, and then you have an indigo vat going. You can dip it and get a variance of color that way. Same with green. Green, again, is one of those colors like orange is kind of on the spectrum. You may get a color that's supposed to give you yellow, but it may tend towards green. If you cook it in a copper dye pot, it will tend to green the color up. You can over dye between blues and yellows. Trying to think, no, not the rosemary. Trying to think, comfrey. Comfrey is a really great plant that'll give you green, and it does some other great things there. Browns, I'm sure you all know about oak gals and walnut husk, henna, rosemary. As you can see here, it's giving me a little bit of brown there. Hops is another one that'll give you some brown colors. So here's a very inspiring picture. I see this and my heart starts racing. All the fiber. But you can create art from your garden. So you're more than likely probably already growing these things, and like pretty much all of you know someone who either knits or sews or spins or weaves. Why not toss them some flowers in and see what's in, what colors you can get. Here are some sources. We forgot to print this out, but I am more than happy to email this PowerPoint to any of you if you want sources. I did bring books, probably left them in the car, but we have books and resources. So if you want to know where to get all this kind of fun stuff, here's some great resources. A lot of stuff you can get online. You'll see the Woolery listed a number of times. They're great too. Any questions? And that's... Yes?
So after you dyed something with these dyes, how careful do you have to be when you wash it?
Most of them are pretty steadfast. The only ones that are fugitive that I can think of off the top of my head are blackberries, and blueberries, elderberries. Those are fugitive. Turmeric dyes a very bright color, but it is fugitive, which means that it will kind of leave you. It'll still be yellow, but it will tone down with time.
That was my question. He asked the exact same one.
Perfect. And that's what the mordant helps with also.
Can you set the fabric in salt too to prevent the running?
Glover's, I think it's called Glover's salt. There is a salt. I know that they use those for acid dyes. I'm not sure with natural dyes. I can tell you in rinsing these, I had more of a difficult time rinsing the Dawn out that I used to scour the fiber than I did in rinsing out the the natural dyes. It didn't run obsessively. It wasn't like a big issue. Maybe some of the richer colors like the madder, but like Yarrow, it pretty much leaches out pretty quickly, and then once it's in, and that's what the mordants really help with.
So I've tried this with eggs, and you mix the natural colors with some vinegar, trying to hold the color into the eggs. Is that also applicable to fiber?
Yes, I kind of yes and no. The vinegar doesn't really hold the color, but it does make the bath more, so it's not really a mordant to help it stick. You could use something like alum. You could boil it with tea, anything that has tannin in it. You can even do like a natural iron or copper where you kind of let it rot in water, but those are gonna sadden the color. They're gonna make it a little more brown or a little bit more green. But the vinegar, what the vinegar does is make it more acidic, so it's going to kind of shift the color. It helps somewhat, but it's not going to make it stick as much as the mordant will.
So what are you going to do with this?
Spin. So I did bring a sample. The yellow right here is that's from yarrow flowers, and kind of spinned it into locks that are similar to the locks that you see there, combed it, put it through a carder, and then spin it into yarn, and then eventually weave it like those samples there. So I weave.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long do you think the process takes from starting, if you don't have your own sheet?
My own sheep, and Wordist told me no.
Right on the 215, they need to be, they need to shear.
Yes.
But if you have clean fiber from the time you started, how long is that process?
Of dyeing it?
Yes, until you can actually use it to make something in the sense of...
Having finished yarn. So if it's clean, I'd say it takes about an hour or so to get your dye bath. If you're going to mordant the fiber, that would take about if you did a quick mordant, let's say about an hour and a half. You can do it simultaneously. So while you're preparing the dye bath, be mordanting your fiber. And then you put it in your fiber. You could put it in for an hour. If you want a richer color, you could keep it overnight. However long it takes for you to rinse it, maybe 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes to rinse it, let it dry, half of a day or so on a hot day to let it dry. Carding it to prepare it like that is maybe 15-20 minutes. So as far as intensive time of actually doing something, maybe 5 hours. Spinning it depends on how much fiber you have and how aggressive you are with spinning it, or how much you want to enjoy the process. So that could take anywhere between, an hour, a couple of hours to much longer. So I'd say, if you were really focused, you could finish the process, start on a Friday night and be ready to weave it Monday morning or Sunday if you were, if you had your steps down. It's not as labor intensive as it could be if you sheared the sheep.
Good evening, my name is Dee. By a show of hands, does anybody know what the week of June 18th through 24th is? What? It's National Pollinator Week. All 50 of our state's governors proclaimed it last year. California has claimed it, or proclaimed it this year, along with 30 others to date. So check out pollinator.org if you're interested in more information. In our presentation tonight, we are going to address 3 topics of great interest. They are 1, what is pollination? 2, who or what are pollinators? And 3, since this affects each and every one of us on this planet, why is this so important? Pollination happens when pollen is transferred from the male part of the male part of a plant to the female part of a plant, which enables fertilization and the production of seed, giving us fruit, grains, vegetables, and more plants. Pollination occurs abiotically, which is non-living, or biotically. Of the abiotic means, the most common is wind. Water and rain account for the other abiotic method. Biotic means rely on living organisms, such as the plant itself, or what is referred to as the pollinators. This includes birds, mammals, and insects. This method accounts for 75 to 80% of all pollination. Tonight, we are going to look at the latter, the pollinators. Insects, to be specific, honeybees, native bees, and butterflies. Without these little critters, we could find ourselves in dire straits. What I mean by this simply is, do you like to eat? Well, I certainly do. We owe about 1 out of every 3 bites we take to these pollinators. Besides food, we also obtain clothing and shelter. Even our economy depends on pollination from the crops we grow. And the air we breathe is owed in part to plants because they not only stabilize the soil and clean our air, they provide us with oxygen and support wildlife. Of the insect pollinators, about 70% is performed by bees, which unfortunately are declining at an alarming rate. Many reasons believed and really noticed since 2006 are because of man-made factors. Bees and the other pollinators have suffered from pesticide exposure, habitat loss, due not only to urbanization, but also agriculture and disease. Unless we take measures to counter these effects, our future could be bleak. Please join me and our team. We'll have Julie, Jerry, raise your hands. We have Chloe, our carpenter bee, who you also know as Brenda Lee, and Mary Lou. The world of some of our pollinators.
All right. My name's Julie. I'm going to focus on, I don't know if you can read this. I'm going to focus on the butterflies and the bees since they do most of our pollination, and specifically our native pollinators, the bees. I was doing some last minute work this morning because I had run across some bees I had run across a website of flies and bees and to tell the difference. And I found this cool website, but I couldn't send it to Brenda to put it in our PowerPoint this morning. So I have a Word document up here, and if you would like to see that, sign it. You put your email on the bottom, and I'll be happy to send it to you. But we have flies that also pollinate for our bees, but they mimic the bees. There was one fly that looked very much like a hornet, and that website shows you that when bees sit, they fold their wings in and behind them, and they have 2 sets of wings. The flies always have theirs open, and they only have 1 set. I think I got that right. But we need to prevent them, and it's the only viable reason I can find not to mulch everything. I'm a big mulch fan, but they need the open dirt to build their holes. There's a couple of them, and I found a couple holes in my yard that I don't know if they're bees or not, but I keep looking at them and hoping they are. We'll find out. They suggested putting a cup over it. Well, I didn't want to trap anybody in or lock anybody out, so I've never done that. It's like, no, I'll catch them someday. But I had been looking for some books as well to help me identify the pollen and nectar plants, because both bees and butterflies require pollen and or nectar for different parts of their life phase, and they get them from different plants. This book on butterflies, one of our native gardeners had at a table a couple weeks ago, well, actually it's a couple months ago, and I ordered it, and it's a really great book that shows the butterflies, and it also gives their nectar and pollen plants for each one. So if you're looking to provide for something that you know is in your neighborhood, there are sources out there that you can find this information, as well as some of the websites. This book I found on bees goes into way more information than the average person needs, but it does have a lot of, in the back, it has a lot of plant pellets to plant for bees so that they have food throughout the year. It has a lot of groups that are involved in helping protecting our pollinators and how we can go about getting in touch with these organizations. I found out the Living Desert has installed with the Urban Bee Lab, installed a new bee garden in their demonstration garden. So now I have to go out there. It's a darn excuse to get out there and see this. But to make people more aware of what we need to do to protect our pollinators and provide for them. They provide so much for us, and we seem to be doing nothing but taking from them, and we don't do near enough to help carry them through for the next year. So let's see, and the rest of that will be for the end. So that's it, for at least for this part.
Am I next? I am next. Okay, I'm Jerry, and I'm going to be talking about the decline of our pollinators. We need our pollinators. Pollinators, mostly bees, are needed for more than 1/3 of the world's crop species. Bee pollinated crops are worth around $20 billion each year in the United States. So what would a picnic be without our bees, without our pollinators? And that's what that picture shows. It wouldn't be very much fun. As Dee said at the beginning, there was a problem discovered in the winter of 2006-2007. Some beekeepers began to report unusually high losses of between 30% and 90% of their hives. This involved sudden loss of the colony's worker bee population, with very few dead bees found around the colony. Usually the queen and the young remained, along with an abundance of honey and pollen reserves, but since hives can't survive without worker bees, the colony would eventually die. This combination of events has been defined as colony collapse disorder. Do we understand why? The good news is that in the last decade, there's been plenty of progress in understanding the mystery of colony collapse disorder. But the bad news is that we now recognize it as a complex problem with many possible causes. There have been many theories about it, but the researchers who are leading the effort to find out why are now focused on these factors. Increased losses due to the invasive varroa mite. See the poor little bee with that mite on him. I saw a video, he's trying to shake it off, and he just couldn't get it off. They have new and emerging diseases like the gut parasite, Nosema. Poisoning caused by exposure to pesticides and fungicides. Next page turned here. Changes to the habitat where bees forage. Stress that bees experience due to the management practices, such as transportation to multiple locations across the country to provide pollination services. Another theory is inadequate forage or poor nutrition. Bees, like humans, need a balanced diet. So this is an almond grove, and honeybees are brought in to help with the crop pollination. The pollen is abundant. However, just like you and I need a variety of fruits and vegetables to stay healthy, they need pollen from a variety of sources to stay healthy. Any or all of these factors can cause immune suppressing stress on the honeybees' bodies, making it difficult for them to stay healthy. Now we're going to go over to the monarch butterfly. Today, monarchs number less than 1/10 of the population in 1996, when scientists estimated that there were a whopping 1 billion of them. Each year, they migrate from their winter home in Mexico and travel north to the U.S. and Canada, but no single butterfly finishes the entire trip. It takes a few generations to complete. A final generation then migrates back down to Mexico in the fall to start the cycle over again. But declining milkweed, the monarch caterpillar's only source of food, has hampered the insect's 2,000-mile journey in recent years. The plant's decrease is linked to an increase in the use of glyphosate, herbicides, in conjunction with genetically modified plantings.
We're not telling you which one.
You can't tell, can you? Okay. Also, bad weather, particularly in Mexico, due to climate change and deforestation, are also threats to migrating butterflies. And we would like to tell you what we can do to help, but that's going to be at the end of our presentation, and Dee and Julie are going to talk about that.
My name is Chloe, and I'm a partner.
Now, you see the...
It's not clicking. Wait a minute, sorry.
That's sorry. Oh, you got to right click instead. You got to do right, there you go, regular click.
Oh, regular click.
Yeah, there you go.
She's a multi-talented bee.
She knows. These are props. No, because you need to remember that we're talking about carpenter bees. But honestly, we don't need any of this. You two-lighters need this. We don't need this. We get everything done with our teeth and toenails. My name is Kate. And you notice the svelte black figure? I'm built this way so that I can easily get in and out of my nest. I will, with my teeth, dig out an almost perfectly round half-inch hole, just big enough to fit. And then I burrow in little ways. I usually start in against the grain because I'm going to make a turn one direction or the other so that I go with the grain, and then it's going to be easier, not only easier to chew, but it's also going to be, it's going to keep predators away, okay? And that's important. So I dig my nest, and in the meantime, oh, that's me in my front yard. That's not too far from the house. But while I'm digging the nest, my husband, Carl, this is Carl Carpenter Bee. Isn't he handsome? He is so brave. Carl can't even sting. Male carpenter bees can't sting. But while I'm inside digging the nest, Carl is standing guard. And he doesn't care how big the predator is. He will dive bomb them, buzz them, and chase them away. And luckily for Carl, not too many other animals know that male carpenter bees can't sting. But don't you think that's pretty brave? Yeah. This is my home. It's out front of the two-leggers place. And you can see that this is more like a condo. Here's my place. But all of these other holes are also homes for other carpenter bees. And even more exciting to me is that many carpenter bees can share the same entrance. We're solitary bees, and we do mate for life. We just have one husband or one wife, but we live sometimes in little communal areas like this, and one tunnel will diverge inside into a whole lot of different nests, okay? And that's the reason that these holes aren't covered up. Oh, these are my baby pictures. These are the kids. Were they ever that little? I don't know. So I dig the hole, and then at the very back of the nest, I lay the first egg, and I fill it with pollen and nectar for the babies, and then I make, with the sawdust, I make little compartments. So each of my kids always has to have their own room. And what they'll do is they'll nest, and in the late summer, they actually dig out. I actually seal the entrance because we don't want predators getting in. So I seal them in, and then in late summer, they will chew their way out. In reverse order, they actually know which one goes first. So the one at the front chews his way out, and then back and back and back until all the kids are out of the nest. Okay. Now, my husband and I don't have much longer to go, unfortunately. We only live for about a year. And actually, Carl will probably pass away before I do. I probably won't last the winter, but it was worth it, don't you think? Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Mary Lou, and of all the pollinators, honeybees fascinated me the most, so that's what I did my focus on. So bees pollinate, as we've learned, 70% of the plants we consume, and butterflies come in second at 22%, and they have an enormous task each day. Honeybees live in hives with thousands of other bees. They use what they collect to build, eat, and protect their hives. They have to work as a group to survive, unlike other, more solitary varieties of bees, like Chloe here. 4 things on their shopping list. They go out each day and collect one of 4 things: pollen, nectar, sap, or water. Bees will visit 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. On average, one hive will produce 100 pounds of honey, and they need that 100 pounds of honey to sustain them throughout the year. Pollen is taken back to the hive as protein to be eaten by the hive, the worker bees, and the brood. And it's also used in combination with other gathered items to produce honey, beeswax, and propolis. Now, propolis was something I never knew about. It's bee glue, and it's made by the worker bees in the hive, and it's used to fill small gaps, like in the wood boxes, the little gaps between the wood. They use that. It reduces, they use it to reduce the entrance of the hive. And they also even use it to encase any larger creature that happens to go into their hive and die, something that's bigger than what they can remove. They'll encase it in propolis so the bacteria from the decaying, whatever it is, doesn't escape into the hive and threaten the hive's health. Kind of mummifies it. Nectar can be taken into the hive as food, which in turn into honey, or it could be used by the bee itself right then and there as an immediate energy drink. Sap from trees and some plants is used to make beeswax and propolis. Water is used to hydrate the colony, and along with nectar, used in the production of honey and beeswax. Honeybees will not intentionally collect more than one thing at a time, before they head back to the hive, so as not to weigh themselves down. For example, if the honeybee is out collecting nectar, he won't collect pollen. It's just too much weight for him. Honeybees look for the highest yield and the shortest amount of flight time. 2 to 3 miles from the hive is not uncommon. If they fly more than 5 miles, though, they run the risk of running out of energy and dying. Scouts may go out first thing in the morning to find the source to meet the hive's needs for that day. According to studies, once they find that source, you're too far. You're too far. Pick up. There we go. Once they find that source, the information is brought back to the hive and related in a form of buzzing and a kind of wiggle dance to the worker bees. The communication is so accurate, the worker bee can fly 2 to 3 miles to find the exact source.
Amazing.
Some may miss it, but it's only by about 20 feet or less. What the bee sees is not the same as what humans see. Bees see color in a different way called ultraviolet vision. It's similar to what we see in a dark room with a black light on, but they see those colors during the daytime. So when we think they are drawn to yellows and blues and purples and whites, they're actually, they see those in a quite differently. So what you see here is what we see, and this is what the bee sees. This, a dandelion, a common dandelion, that's what, according to scientists, that's what they see. The ability to see ultraviolet light helps guide the bees to the pollen-containing parts of the flowers. Studies also show that other senses involved in finding what they need. Bees can smell the fragrance of the flowers that promise nectar and maybe pheromone trails left by other bees. Sensing electromagnetic fields may also be used to assist them to and from the flower to the hive, and it may also warn them of an impending storm. I tried to think back, and I can't think of any bee that I saw flying around in the rain or when there was an electric storm going on. So in conclusion, more flowering plants, more bees, better planet. Okay.
So, because of what we discussed tonight, how can we help our pollinators? You could plant a pollinator garden to provide a diverse and year-round source of nourishment. Work with our landowners, including farmers and beekeepers, as well as local, state, and national governments, to provide an abundance and diverse source of food, as well as other requirements for our pollinators. Avoid or limit pesticides, and if monarchs live in your area, consider planting milkweed so that their caterpillars have food.
And on our native bees, which is my main interest.
We missed them.
We did.
We did. We missed all these things we missed.
All right. Who missed it?
No,
we did
covered
it.
The only
Yeah,
thing
covered it.
that wasn't talked about was the transportation right of ways to provide refuge for the wildlife.
Yeah, if you're ever walking down the road, it's amazing what you see on the side of the road. Not just our trash, but what the bees use. And you can use that corridor to get from one nice, efficient field to another one. So try not to spray your ditches. They don't have ditches out here. They do where I come from. And people stop mowing and spraying them for just that reason. Anyway, for bees in the yard, we have a sizable property, and trying to help our pollinators, as I said, I stopped mulching once I realized they needed the bare ground and couldn't get through the mulch. So half of my yard looks really nice and the other half's bare dirt. It looks more like this picture. You want to remove your non-natives only because of our native bees. They have evolved to be with the plants that they are here. Sometimes the bees and the butterflies' mechanism, their mouth parts fit flowers. And when we start planting flowers that don't belong here, they don't fit and they can't use them. And it's nice for us, but we need the bees to help us in other areas. One nice thing too, I realized we had a tree fall down and I just stacked the wood because I was too lazy to carry it away. Well, over the years, it started to decay and it's become this whole community There's bees in there. The lizards populated it within a day. And now it's just an old, nice wood stack. And it looks nice in the yard, and the animals can use it. Keep your dirt. I did read that they like it on the southeast side. Who has the southeast section? So I'm experimenting in my yard with just maybe that side of the plant as opposed to the hill. They don't like it on the west side because of course it gets too hot, but they don't like it in the shade of a shrub or a tree because then it won't warm up for the larvae. So you kind of need a nice balance. I've never had a bee tell me what that balance they need. So it's kind of an experiment, but if anybody hears of anything, hey, let me know. I'm all for trying to set my yard up to fix them. But we really need to work on providing sanctuary for them so that they can help us survive in whatever we have coming up in our life trails. So are there any questions? Yes.
Do you know, I have a fountain that draws the bees, and they just like hover on it like a hummingbird almost, and sit. But I don't know if that's a native bee or a honey bee. I don't know how to tell the difference.
I had a yucca flower earlier this year. It was so cool. I've never seen one up close before. And I go out there and it's buzzing, and I have never seen so many different types of bugs, all kinds of bugs, crawling bugs, flying bugs on this one plant. And I couldn't tell the bees from the flies either. And this morning, one of my finds was, how do you tell the difference between a bee and a fly? Because there are mimics. There's, like I said, there was a fly that looked amazingly like a hornet. I didn't know enough to know that that wasn't a hornet. I thought it was, but it was a fly. But they had 4 points to look at to distinguish if it's a fly or a bee. And the main thing is the wings, like I said earlier, and the eyes. The bee's eyes are more to the side of their head. Flies are in the front. And then the antenna. Flies have very small or non-existent antenna, and bees have jointed antenna. And I thought, oh, that was so cool. I never knew that. And then in my difference search between the native bees and the honeybees, and while they're both important, the native bee evolved here, and our honeybee has become naturalized, and they survive because we help them. But the native bees of it says, 7 species out of the 20,000 worldwide species of bees are honeybees. The rest are all native to their own little ecosystem that they have evolved in. So we really need to go above and beyond to help them out, to help them help us. Yes?
Did you read any articles about the survival rate of a bee? Is it more in a natural hive that they've established themselves versus a man-managed hive?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because
bees know what they need, we guess.
Yeah, they go out and get the different nutritions that they need. If they're in a man-made hive, we feed them. But like I was saying before, their nutrition is not as good.
So their survival rates
They're not
better in a natural hive that they
because if they have the good nutrition, then their immune system is strong, and they're not susceptible to like the mites and the intestinal problems.
This book that I found is it goes into bee biology quite heavily. It's like, I don't care about the different family of bees. That's not the level I'm looking at. But it went into all kinds of things. It touched on what Mary Lou looked at as to how they're drawn to flowers and how they're matched. The bees and the butterflies are matched to the flowers that they go to. And it touched on some of the things that man is doing to make it really hard for them and what we can do to help them. It touched on the societies and groups that you can contact for further information on how to help them. What can you do in your area to get specific lists for your areas of what kinds of bees are in your area. One of them had a download that went through the different kinds of wood piles that the different types of bees had. Some like that really tight, like a pine log. Where's Lisa?
Lisa should have stuck her hand up already.
I just have a quick question. You had mentioned that they they make a certain amount of honey and they use that for the year. So does that mean that when we take honey, are we starving?
Not so much in Southern
Starving.
California
Yes.
because the temperatures don't get that low, but in colder areas, a lot of times they need, it depends on the size of the hive and how healthy it is. You can take a certain percentage of it out, but they need that to have a nutrition source for the winter.
Beekeepers will put a super on top of their hive. It's another little small hive box, and that's for you to take and you leave the rest with.
Yes.
So these will keep making more if you provide them.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to take their food in the tent.
Yeah, that's what I got concerned.
You know, I think we need a lot more education to help educate our neighbors and stuff. Because in the area I live in, I see a lot of people, they will plant their slope full of rosemary, and then they'll go out there and kill the bees. And they remove the rosemary plants if you don't want the bees at your front door. And I don't think they understand. And I see it a lot. When I'm out walking, I'm always stopping someone and go, no, don't do that.
I'm watching too all the time, but I learned a lot with the presentation, and when I saw what the other ladies had done with their section of it, it's like there's so much we need to do to educate ourselves and our neighbors to help them out.
Understanding your irrigation system. I'm Brianna, this is Diane, Jorge, and Lisa. How many of you guys prior to this class assumed drip irrigation was simple and easy? Okay. We've all come a long way since last fall. Our presentation will touch on a few key points and tips to maintain your irrigation system at home. Our objectives are: 1, to identify your irrigation situation. The second is to identify your irrigation system. And our third is common problems and ongoing maintenance. Everyone's yard is unique and individual, and so is your irrigation system. Different water requirements are needed at different times of the year. So why invest in understanding your situational irrigation? 1, to protect your planning investment. 2, to save money on water. And 3, to have consistent watering for your unique garden.
I'm going to tell you the story of my garden.
Oops. Sorry. It's okay.
I don't want to shut that yet.
Okay.
Dave told us to go faster.
I live in Riverside in a house that was built in the 60s. I'm not going to show you a picture of what my yard looked like at that time, but I want you to visualize the yards from the 60s, maybe from your childhood, the house you grew up in. Most of the houses at that time, the yards, had lots of grass, a few shrubs, some trees, maybe some ivy, pyracantha, junipers, maybe some agapanthus, a few palm trees, if you lived in this area. Well, that's what my yard looked like. It had all that stuff. I didn't live there at that time. I moved in 1986, and really not much had been done to the yard in that time from it was built in 64 till 86. Well, I was busy raising children. I had a job. I had a life. So I really didn't do very much to my yard until about 2 years ago. And by that time, we've had many years of drought. Water has gotten expensive. And I knew it was time to get rid of the lawn. So I took all my Sunset Garden clippings and that I'd saved over the years and all my dreams to a contractor. And we came up with a plan for a new yard. And this is what it looked like. We put in decomposed granite walkways and lots of mulch, drip irrigation, and all new drought-resistant plants. Left the trees. There's an ash tree that was shading the front yard, so we kept that. We kept the city oak tree, and we kept one crepe myrtle, but everything else was new. Everything looked really beautiful. The project was completed in October 2 years ago, and I just thought I could relax and not worry about a thing. That was my aha moment. That does not happen with drip irrigation. So underneath everything, there's a drip irrigation system, and I soon learned that there can be lots of problems that arise from drip irrigation. Even with my limited knowledge, I figured it out. What I did was I started to go to Home Depot on a regular basis. And I made a good friend there, and my new friend gave me lots of ideas, lots of tips, and that's what I would recommend to anybody, and you could recommend this to people you talk to in the information tables. We don't know everything, but go find a friend, someone who has a lot of knowledge, and they will help you. So what happened in my yard is, it looks really nice in these pictures, but underneath some of the plants, there was, well, first of all, the plants grew, and they covered up, they allowed leaves to accumulate underneath. Well, nobody told me that you're supposed to take those leaves out. They blocked the sprinklers, and they weren't working properly. So some of the plants started showing signs of stress and dying. And so this is one, you can kind of see the sprinkler on the picture on the left. And that whole section of the plant had died. What I now do is walk my yard every week or so, and I look at every plant, make sure there's water coming to it. And if not, I take care of it. Sometimes I have to go to Home Depot again and talk to my friend, but it's taken care of. Some of the other problems that I discovered in my yard that were preventing the water from getting out were, in addition to the leaf buildup, the heads get clogged. You know, we have wonderful water in Riverside, and you have to pop those heads off and either fix it or replace it. And I learned a trick from my new friend. If you hold a cigarette lighter under the tip, the flame, it pops it off. And it really does work. Yeah, it works really well. So that was my tip. All is well now. 2 years later, things are growing. I'm still learning, but I'm sure I'll continue to learn. But I'm happy that I put in the drip irrigation. It saved me a lot of money, and I think all yards would benefit from it. Now, Jorge's going to tell you about his yard.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about your irrigation system and identifying it and bringing it down to a couple of different steps. So we're going to talk about three steps, A, B, C. We're trying to keep it simple so that it's in your memory and you can remember, you know, that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be straightforward. It's just a matter of how you approach it. So first you want to talk about or determine your control. You're talking about controlling the amount of water, but really you're talking about the control of time. When do you want the water to go on and how often? So we can control it manually, just on and off, right? But that requires us to be vigilant, turn and actually go out there, turn off on and off the water. We can do a semi-automatic irrigation. We can have an electronic timer, battery operated, wall powered. But you know, you have to set it, you have to program it, you have to know when you want it to go on and off, and you have to maintain it. You have to replace the batteries every now and then. Or you can go full out automatic. You can get all the the bells and whistles for irrigation system. You can have rain sensors and such, and just basically set it and forget it to a certain degree. But that's expensive, and it's costly. So you just have to determine what are you wanting to do, or what are you willing to spend on your system. So the second part of your irrigation system is your routing. Where do you want the water to go? So how do you get it there? You have your plumbing, above and below ground is typical, or you can really break it down into two, above and below ground. Even, routing it along the edge or even above through a trellis is still above ground. Most common ways of routing or diverting the water to where you want it is through PVC and poly tubing. And third step, C, is emission of the water. How is the water applied? Usually when we talk about the emission, we talk about, drip irrigation, we talk about sprayers, bubblers, soakers, and drip. But primarily when you talk about water and how much water, you talk about it in gallons per minute or gallons per hour. So when you are trying to determine the amount of water, just make sure that you adjust it for your water needs. And as it grows, the water needs may change. Common problems that we see with irrigation systems are your plants dying, your clogged irrigation system usually due to calcium buildup. You're overspraying, you have runoff, physical damage due to your weed trimmer, your gardener, your rodents, and just handling or mishandling in general. So some of the possible solutions for our issues that we see is to check to make sure that we have sufficient water in the plant. That's usually the number one indicator with when you have an issue with the plant is, oh, it's dying, or hey, it's wilting. So usually you go out there and you check to see if it's getting water. So there's a couple of steps as we described. Just make sure that you look at your plant, look at what is going on with your plant, and make sure that you're getting water, that you're tending to the dripper, and just make sure that it's not clogged and that it's emitting the proper amount of water. And the other thing you want to do is walk your irrigation system, walk your garden every now and then. Because we usually have it on a timer, we set it and forget it. But usually when the time that your irrigation system is on is during the day or at night when we're not there, we're not paying attention to it. So the best thing you can do is turn on your irrigation system manually, override it, and walk your garden, walk your irrigations, and check to make sure that you don't have a gusher. You don't have this one area where you're losing all your water, where you would otherwise be taking advantage of your irrigation system. Maintenance, it's ongoing and going and going. We know that. I mean, that's something that just we can't get away with it, get away from it. But why do we do it? Or why do we do it? We want to schedule quarterly or checks on your system. That's very important. We want to replace timer batteries. Again, very important, because if it's as simple as a battery and your power goes out, or if it's just battery operated, all your plants, your investments might die. You want to adjust your cycle times depending on your season, depending on your climate. You also want to inspect and adjust water needs as your plants mature. You want to open and flush your lines, and you want to repair broken or plugged emitter lines. And the last one that really comes down to it, get a new gardener if he's breaking all of your sprinklers. So, why do we want to maintain our irrigation? Well, because we will be able to control our evapotranspiration cycle and our microclimate. We are going to create hydrozones, permacultures, and peace of mind. We're going to maintain aesthetics and floral appearance. We're going to produce consistent fruits and vegetables and flowers. We're going to attract wildlife and pollinators. And we're going to save time and money. Plants are your investment, so take care of your investment.
We have a supplemental handout that Diane will be passing out to you. And if anyone's interested in updating or putting in a new landscape, like my husband and I are, this is a catalog from one of the companies called Netafim. We have several here. Would anyone like any? And I'll have Diane pass those out too. In the meantime, a couple minutes for questions and answers.
Are you finding that you need to replace the lines completely because of sun degradation about every 5 years?
It depends on the type and the quality that was there before. PVC, we moved into a 10-year-old property And even the buried lines are getting brittle. So we are replacing those as we find them and as we get gushers. But also the UV, we have had to definitely cover those up with either boxes or your decorative hollowed out rocks or other plants and shrubs to help shade them. One thing that I found out with our rain harvesting system is you can actually buy UV paint and paint those items, and it will help protect. Great question. Anyone else? So just remember that irrigation is very individual. It's very customized based on all of your landscaping. Have fun, be flexible. There is no one right way to do this. And yes, you will screw up. You'll have blue fingers with all the glue, but have fun. We're out there gardening, playing in the dirt. Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Hi, we're the Victory Gardeners. I'd like you to meet Eva. She doesn't have a garden at her house. She has a, I did it backwards. She doesn't have a house at her garden. She has a garden at her house. And she's going to introduce me. Right?
And this is Ron Bose. And hey, where's your, oh, that's a different picture.
Yeah.
He's a community garden person, and he has this great garden. I visited it in the beginning, kind of, and I need to go back because they've done a lot of work since I was there.
Okay, I'm Mike.
What you're going to introduce?
I'm going to introduce this young man right here. And his name is Alex. And he's going to show us some rather scientifically based information in gardening. Each of us are showing different aspects of taking Victory Gardening to the next step. Originally, the Victory Garden was a war effort that was brought on. But as time has progressed, we have a different war effort now where we have to feed more people. We have to find different pesticides and herbicides and fungicides that we can't use. We have to make more land available for us to grow things. And that's what comes in with the research.
And this is Mike. If you have any questions about hydroponics or complex engineering, he's your guy.
So here's the background. World War II started in 1938 when the Nazis invaded Poland. The United States, as you recall, or maybe read in history books, remained neutral while France fell and England came under attack. Then came Pearl Harbor and FDR's speech to the joint session of Congress, followed by a declaration of war against both Germany and Japan. Victory gardens were then set up across the country because, as you recall or know from reading history, there was rationing of meat, dairy products, and rubber and all sorts of things. In fact, right here in Riverside, because of March Air Force Base, there was total blackout. There were wardens on each street to make sure that no one left their lights on at night, that they had their curtains pulled down so that if the enemy should attack March Air Force Base, they would be dark. The whole place would be dark. The person who's, ration cards. Here's a ration card. There were assigned to everybody in the United States had a ration card, and they could only use certain amounts of products for each month, and then they'd have to get a renewal of their card. And I say everybody in the United States had a card. There were really 130,000 people who did not have cards, and that was the Japanese. They were interned in 10 internment camps around the United States, mostly on the West Coast. But the interesting thing is that the Japanese grew victory gardens in their compounds by their barracks to express their loyalty to the United States. Let's see if these gals will sing for us. So that's what was happening in the pop radio world. To keep morale up, by the way, right across the street, or across the freeway from us, Bob Hope was doing the first of his USO tours. That was in 1941 that he started at March Air Force Base, and eventually those went all around the world. Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who promoted victory gardens, the wife of the president. In 1943, 40% of the food eaten in the United States was grown in these victory gardens, either individual backyard gardens or group gardens. In fact, we had a sample of their government document, which was about 20 pages long, explaining how to build a victory garden. And it was very interesting when you, for example, one of the things in the book, it said, do not buy tools. We need the metal for the war. Share tools. There you are. We did leave that slide in. So this is the garden that I've been working on. And that's my thumb. This is the area that we started with our community garden, and you can see it's pretty bare right now. We've had a building removed. Our contractor's explaining how he's going to grade the land there and leave a drainage area over at the side, which I've now discovered can be what we call a rain garden. And we added a Franklin Delano Roosevelt quote, "We have nothing to fear." The new war that we're fighting is a war against things like obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, and an interesting spelling of malnutrition. And, who did spell check on this? Who's on the other? So our goal in this presentation is to convince you to start a victory garden to address some of these pressing personal and social needs. And we have, in addition to the list that I gave you before, we have water shortages, climate change, air pollution, and soil erosion. So Michelle Obama's victory garden that she set up, or garden that she set up a few years ago, was actually a throwback to Eleanor Roosevelt's original garden. Now we're ready for Michael's explanation about hydroponics.
Put your slides in. Is there?
No, that's not it. Go to the main. There we go. Okay, I'm going to start with introducing myself with a little more detail. That I've been a grower all my life. My background is mechanical engineering in the food industry. So my focus has always been food and feeding people and understanding the concepts of large quantity feeding, which mostly I also specialize in food production equipment and storage, like chillers, boilers, large walk-in freezers, etc. So that's why I am into hydroponics. For one, it's because of the engineering background. I actually was living on a property that had very nice landscaping with plastic and rocks. It looked real pretty, but it was earwig heaven. So I couldn't grow anything, and as we know, earwigs love lettuce. So as I was growing lettuce in the ground, it was a lost cause, and I began learning how to do hydroponics, whereas you learn that you do save space, saves water, and eliminates a lot of the problems that you have with insects and the inputs. are very minimal. It's automatic feeding and definitely no weeding. Plants grow faster. There are reports that you can get anywhere from, what it'll take 3 months for a plant to grow. We can, in ground, we can get 20 crops, 20 rotations out of it. The history of hydroponics actually comes from like the floating gardens of the Aztecs, the Chiampas, whereas they were originally not the great warriors that we thought they were, because they had to build their own land. They took rocks and sand from the ground and built their own islands. And eventually, they used the different methods of growing mediums. For our needs, they used sand and rocks from the bottom of the river, which is now Mexico City. Put in some pictures. Anyway, moving on. We can't get lost. Growing mediums that we have are cocoa coir, vermiculite, and clay pebbles, perlite and rock wool cubes, and sphagnum peat moss. Those different mediums that we can use are very helpful. There's also different methods, wick methods, drip, ebb and flow, nutrient film techniques, deep water cultures, etc. We're going over a couple of the small methods. This is like a cracking method. This is also deep water culture here, where I was growing lettuce on my back porch. I'm just taking a 6-pack. These are pictures of an ebb and flow system from the Sherman Indian Reservation School. That's what that is. And this is an example of a nutrient film system. Under this system, you would be able to grow larger products, like fruiting products, like tomatoes, cucumbers, simply just by trellising from those tray tables. Deep water culture, air aquaponics, and the environments that you use. Why are we doing that?
3 minutes or so?
Good. I can keep talking. You're next. I can keep talking.
So, like I said before, I'm Alex, and my garden is atrocious, and so I'm never going to show you any photos of it. But my garden actually is a lot of the research I do. So I'm a grad student at UC Riverside, and I actually know a lot of other grad students whose research is a lot more applied, and who are working to make gardens better, to make our gardens more victorious. So I wanted to highlight a couple of grad students that I know who are working to make our gardens a lot better. The first one is Suzanne Stone. I met her in my master's at Georgia. She now works for Urban Seed Incorporated. She was getting a PhD in watermelon breeding. And if you notice in that left-hand photo, she's actually got her baby on her back. She started grad school and then immediately got pregnant, and then stayed in grad school, finished a PhD, and right as she was writing up, got pregnant again. So she had 2 children in grad school and still finished faster than me. So she's pretty amazing. But for her research, she was looking at all the kinds of watermelon we grow. And the main types that are in your garden are probably different vine types. And if you grow them, they get kind of everywhere. So in commercial production, this is super great because you get a bunch of watermelon, but it's really hard to weed because you have to go in and weed by hand. You can't just spray Roundup on everything and you'll kill the watermelon. So there's a lot of great varieties that taste really good, but they have this really annoying growth habit. There's another kind of watermelon that's more compact, and they plant it in the same fields, and it's got this much more compact growth form. They use it to actually pollinate the other watermelon varieties, so you can get seedless ones. These 2 different watermelon have different numbers of chromosomes, and so you get seedless watermelon when they hybridize. But the watermelon themselves aren't really edible. They're like really native watermelon, like back from Africa. But this nice growth structure makes them outcompete a lot of weeds. And so Suzanne's project was finding a way to crossbreed these 2 so that you can get the edibility of the watermelon on top, but also of the growth factor, or the growth form of the one on the bottom. So she did a lot of trials of these, and I think she's got a mostly open pollinated organic variety that she's getting into the late stages of testing. So soon, hopefully, I'll have watermelon that are much easier to weed and take way less input. Another person that I know, also from Georgia, is Tripti Bashist. She's now a professor at the University of Florida, and I knew her when she was working not on citrus, but on blueberries. And so if you've ever harvested blueberries in a commercial setting, they actually tickle them off the plant. So they've got this, this sort of doorway that opens up. The plant's base will go in through here, and then these different rotors are sort of rubberized, and they'll just bump the berries off the plant. And so you want a bowl of berries that has no stem on them. And very occasionally you'll get one that does have a stem. And this is bad because that stem doesn't taste great, but it also pokes the other berries and can make them rot quicker. And so Tripti's research was into how to get these blueberries off the plant without a stem. And so one of the first things she tried was adding a plant growth regulator called ABA that makes plants just drop their flowers, or drop their fruits, I mean. And it actually turned out that the natural way for a blueberry to lose its fruit is with a stem, just like a cherry. And so when we tickle them off the plant, we actually want them. So her research was mostly about getting berries that don't fall off the plant, that we can tear off, so they won't have a stem. And then the last person I want to talk about is a student from UC Riverside, keeping with our theme of bees. He studies native bees. And so he was at Cal Poly Pomona studying watermelons. So it's a very tiny world. And if you want to talk about bees, oh, honey, go to lunch with Jake. He will talk your ear off. But he has a couple of different questions. So in California, there's a bunch of these native plant nurseries, and they're stocked all year with native plants. And the bees, of course, love this. It's a reservoir of nectar and pollen for them, so it's a great resource. But these native plant nurseries often spray a lot of pesticides. And so he's wondering, how do these bees interact with a native plant nursery that, on the one hand, provides them with a ton of food, but on the other hand, can also be a really awful reservoir for pesticides? And so these are a couple of photos from Jake's research. You might see different commercial nurseries around here. They'll have these like hanging baskets planted, not planted, but stationed in the middle of a field. And there's no pheromones or anything like that. It's just a passive trap to catch bees and see which different species are out there and how often they're visiting these nurseries. And so he's been sampling at local nurseries, but then he also has some photos here, like him out at, on campus on Riverside, building sort of mini nurseries to test new management practices to help all of these native plant nurseries maybe manage their bees more effectively or be a little bit nicer to them. So those are just 3 people that I know that are helping us make our victory gardens a little more victorious. And I'm going to hand it off to Eva, who's going to talk about probably the best garden in the group. Do you want me to move that slides for you?
It's that easy, but I might call you back if I screw it up.
I won't go far.
Okay, so I'm here tonight to share some pictures of my garden. It's been a 30-year journey, and hopefully it'll be an encouragement to you as you work on your personal Edens. That's to the entrance to the front door. Anyway, this is a long view through the herb garden to the patio off the living room. And what I wanted to share with you was, on one end is this fireplace barbecue, and it was made out of broken concrete and oyster shells. And both those were free because our neighbors were having their walkway replaced. And I took a 5-gallon bucket a couple times to Taps Restaurant on a Sunday brunch and said, "Will you fill this? I'll be back." And so that was free. And then on the other side is this buffet that was cobbled together from a Singer sewing machine base at a yard sale, an old coffee table top. That was a salvaged window from the side of the road. The wooden metal shelf is from World Market, and the tin sign came from Tuesday Morning. I wanted to share too that a really good way to get inspiration for gardening is books and tours, and I did bring some of my favorite books. They're on a little round table out there. You can thumb through them if you have time. And one of the best tours is Bird's Tour, and I've listed those on a handout that I think I'll just put on the sign-up table outside. And then this is an area that is behind the house. It used to be really shaded. It had birch trees and ground cover, and when the trees died and were removed, it was like an arid wasteland for a year until we decided to re-envision it as veggie beds, raised veggie beds. This is one of a dozen seating areas that are around the house. And there's rebar there, which is a great material because it's inexpensive. And my son welded this. The first one he ever did, he just bent and wired together. So there's a lot of uses for it in the garden. Besides being cheap, it just kind of blends into your landscape. So those grapes will eventually provide shade for that area. This is the other side with some of the raised veggie beds, and right there you can see the bamboo trellises. And I don't know if you can see it very well. There's expandable willow edging. Those came from the 99-cent store. And I'm telling you this because, you know, it doesn't have to be expensive. I used to get all these magazines, and my kids would go, "Why are you looking at those? You can't afford it." And I'd say, but it inspires you to, what's the word, like substitute, or it gives you ideas. Yes. And this is the potting shed that was made out of doors bought at yard sales and the Habitat for Humanity Restore, which is a great source. And one end of the shed has this counter with the water that was piped in from an outdoor spigot, and that little bucket sink we empty into the garden. This is the kitchen patio, and those are more French doors from the Restore, Habitat Restore, that are enclosing it. And even that metal piece over the French door, it's roses, it's really pretty. That's from the Habitat Restore. And the others were given to me by neighbors or bought at some of the vintage shops that are on one of the handouts. And this is the view from that patio. And I was going to say, too, you don't even have to hire a contractor for your hardscape because those bricks were just set in the ground. And we've done that with stepping stones, too. And you have the option then, too, of easily, like, changing it out if you down the road, years down, or whatever you want to change. This is a corner of the garden that transitions to behind the house. This was my son's first rebar project. We call it the igloo, but I have it here so you can see. To the right at the top, it's like a dome, and it connects to arches. And eventually the roses will cover that, and we can get rid of the umbrella. And so I just wanted to say that you know, we get a lot from Mother Nature, and I just hope that everybody can enjoy their gardens and get the most use from them. I mean, we have these beautiful bouquets to grace our tables. Even a small nosegay can lift your spirits every time you walk by it. The recipe for this baked German apple pancake, we have an apple tree, is out there if you want it. And here's a garden salad with edible flowers. Homemade jams, honey from the backyard beehive, and fresh eggs from the chickens. This is the tea table at an annual garden party. And here's a picture of a small group of the invitees with Spike the dog. And so I just want to encourage you to get out there and get in the dirt. And I have my son to thank for turning my dreams into reality. So he saved me a ton on labor. It wouldn't be what it is today. But anyway, so there's free plants for the taking out there. I don't know if you noticed them, and some garden decor items that, you know, I've used in the past, and now I'm passing them on. So help yourselves. And happy gardening and continued volunteering.
You got a question?
Yes, question.
Ava, how big is your yard? I mean, it's beautiful. I'd love to see
I
it.
think that it's a 1,700-foot lot. It's not big. The house is less than 1,200 feet. It's a tract home. But, because that was one thing I was going to say to you, not to be overwhelmed by the big picture, because it was a new house, so there was nothing in the backyard. So it was one garden room at a time. Yes.
I was going to say that not this past year, but the year before, you were on the garden tour. And that is too weird because now that I saw that first picture, I thought, I actually knew you from before, and I wondered why you seemed familiar, because I've been in your yard. And those pictures don't even do it justice.
Well-
And that, when I saw them, I go, oh my God, that's the person I visited their house.
You're all invited anytime. My number's in there. Just show up. And I only do that tea party once a year, but yeah. So.
Any other questions?
Hi, Michael, I wanted to ask about the deep water irrigation.
Yes.
I've only seen one kind of hydroponic actually physically seen it, and the water just kind of pours over every 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
So it gets oxygen in between. But how does the deep water work? If the plants don't drown?
No, you leave enough air between the top of the water and where the plant is. And that's where your air exchange is happening.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
then the plant reaches down for the water?
Yes.
But it has...
And it has enough air exchange. Your roots are going to follow the water.
You know the picture, it had those little clay,
Yes.
I actually planted a tomato and grew a tomato in that kind of system. I bought one of those. But I found that it used a lot of water because of the circulating, the evaporation. I mean, I thought it used a lot of water compared to what I was watering my plants in the ground.
What you would do is the clay pebbles do help, but you can use plastic, you use aluminum foil, anything to cover up. You have to reduce that rate of evaporation.
Yeah, they didn't tell you to do that.
Yeah, you have to do that no matter what.
Yeah, because it was a
Yeah.
lot of evaporation.
It's gonna be a
I
lot.
could hardly, I was thinking, this is taking a lot of water.
Yeah, if it's wide open, the cracking method, for me, I'm using even now growing kale in a 3 by 3 foot area. I got 22 heads of kale growing, and I keep it covered. The kale itself spreads out and covers the clay pebble, so the rate of evaporation is coming from the plants, not from up in
Yeah,
there.
because it circulates.
Yes, exactly.
Would you consider being on the next door?
Hydroponic growing, I know it's faster and you get more cycles of productivity. Do you have any research on the nutrient quality?
There's nothing definitive versus hydroponics and soil to this date. Nothing.
Do you find that you can grow things out of season? Like, say, for instance, you just mentioned kale, and my kale peaked out back in March. So do you find that you're able to grow longer or grow things, quote unquote, out of season or when?
Not necessarily so. You still utilize microclimates, and you're still, in an outdoor environment, you're a slave to the environment.
Okay. Oh, so it is outdoors still?
You can do outdoors, you can do indoors.
Okay.
Yes, that option is always available.
Let's go party.